I'll never forget the day I first saw Martha. It was during a church event at St. Joseph's Cathedral in Washington, D.C. The event was a simple charity dinner, with the usual faces from the church community, older couples, families, a few singles like me. I was a regular attendee, always in the back rows, but Martha, she was different. She had an energy that pulled you in from across the room, even though she was sitting in the middle of the hall, just talking to a few people. I noticed her instantly. She was wearing this modest dress, but her smile, her dark eyes, there was something magnetic about her. I had been working long hours as a builder, putting up commercial structures in the city. My job was demanding, but I always managed to fit in time for church. I didn't expect to meet anyone that night. Life was simple, straightforward. Then Martha changed everything. Her laugh, a gentle melody that echoed through the hall, caught my attention first. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but every word she said seemed to resonate. After the dinner, I found myself walking over to where she was sitting. I remember my heart racing as I approached her. I didn't know what to say, but I introduced myself anyway. "Hi, I'm James," I said, feeling awkward. She turned and gave me this warm smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. "I'm Martha," she said softly. "Nice to meet you." We talked for hours that night, and somehow, it felt like we had known each other for years. There was an ease between us, a comfort that I didn't feel with anyone else. By the end of the evening, we exchanged numbers and agreed to meet again. Over the next few months, we saw each other almost every day. We explored the city, shared meals, and talked about everything under the sun. She worked at a beauty salon downtown, a place I would always swing by to grab coffee with her on my days off. She would tell me about the clients she worked with, the older women, the brides-to-be, and the celebrities who occasionally came in. She had this knack for making people feel special, and that wasn't just with her clients. It was with everyone. She was magnetic, and before I knew it, I was completely drawn to her. When I asked her to marry me, I already knew I wanted to spend my life with her. She was everything I had never known I needed, and the thought of losing her terrified me. We got married a year later in a small, intimate ceremony. The church was filled with friends, family, and the warmth of our shared commitment. Everything felt perfect, too perfect. But then life, as it often does, threw us a curveball. It started with strange phone calls. At first, I brushed them off. Unknown numbers calling late at night, hanging up when I answered. I thought it was just a glitch in the system, or maybe even telemarketers trying to sell something. But the calls kept coming, night after night. Then the text messages started. I'd wake up to a screen full of cryptic messages, "I know what you're hiding," or "You can't run from the truth." They were unsettling, but I never mentioned them to Martha. I didn't want to worry her. But one night, as I was sitting in the living room, I heard the phone ring again. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. The voice on the other end was low and distorted. "You've been warned, James." The line went dead. I put the phone down, staring at it, my mind racing. Who was this? What did they want from me? The next morning, I decided to check the caller's number. It led me to a man named Daniel Kingston. He was someone I didn't recognize, but the name struck a chord in the back of my mind. I racked my brain, trying to recall where I might have heard it before. It wasn't until I was meeting a client at a construction site a few days later that it hit me. Daniel Kingston was the brother of a man named Thomas, someone I had worked with on a project years ago. Thomas had disappeared after a scandal involving a large sum of money going missing. It had been hushed up quickly, but there were whispers about shady dealings in the company. I never thought much of it at the time, but suddenly, everything felt connected. I tried to push it aside, focusing on my work and my life with Martha. But things only got stranger. There were more phone calls, more cryptic messages. Then one night, Martha found one of the texts on my phone. "James," she said, her voice trembling. "What's going on? Who's sending you these?" I tried to brush it off, tell her it was nothing. But she wasn't convinced. "James, you're not telling me something. I can see it in your eyes." I looked at her, the woman I loved more than anything. My mind screamed at me to tell her everything, but I couldn't. I didn't want to drag her into this mess. That night, after Martha fell asleep, I sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up to find that Martha was gone. There was no note, no explanation, just an empty space where she had been. Her side of the bed was cold. Panic set in immediately. I rushed to call her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, each time getting the same response. I couldn't sit still, not knowing what had happened. I drove to the salon, hoping she'd just gone in early. But when I arrived, the lights were off and the door was locked. "Hey, is Martha here?" I asked the receptionist, my voice tight with worry. The woman behind the counter looked at me, confused. She wasn't scheduled to come in today. She hasn't been here since yesterday. I didn't know what to do. I retraced my steps, driving around the city, stopping by places we had gone together. I checked the apartment building, but there was no sign of her. Hours passed, then a text came through. "You were warned, James. Stay away from Martha if you know what's good for you." I felt the blood drain from my face as I read it. Whoever this was, they had her. They were using her to get to me. I had to find her. I remember the first time I thought about proposing to Martha. It wasn't something I'd planned for a long time, but it felt like it had been written in the stars. From the moment we met, everything about her seemed to fall into place. Her smile, her laughter, the way she made me feel like the best version of myself. We had been together for months, and in that time, I realized I couldn't imagine my life without her. It wasn't just the little things, like how she loved cooking Sunday dinners or the way she'd hum softly to herself while getting ready in the mornings. It was the way she made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. So, after a few months of spending nearly every day together, I started thinking about the next step. I wanted to marry her. I didn't want to waste any more time. She was the one. I could picture our future. A house, kids, a life that didn't need to be perfect, just perfect for us. It wasn't an impulsive decision. I'd been careful about it. I remember visiting a jewelry store one afternoon, nervously scanning the rows of rings. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew the one when I saw it. A simple, elegant band with a diamond that sparkled like it was made just for her. It was perfect. I bought it that day, not knowing how exactly I was going to ask her, but confident that I would. We had a quiet weekend planned. We just finished a busy week. Martha had been working late at the salon, and I'd been wrapping up a construction project in the city. So we decided to take a day to just be with each other, to escape from the grind for a little while. I suggested we go for a walk around Georgetown, down by the water, where we could just talk and enjoy the crisp air. I knew I'd have to ask her soon, but I didn't want to rush it. I wanted everything to feel natural. That afternoon, we sat on a bench by the river. The sound of the water lapping against the shore was calming, and the light of the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Martha rested her head on my shoulder, her hand in mine, and for a moment, I thought about how lucky I was. This was everything I'd ever wanted. I pulled the ring box from my pocket and turned to her. "Martha," I said, my voice a little shaky despite how sure I was. "There's something I need to ask you." She smiled up at me, her eyes bright and curious. "What's that?" I opened the box, revealing the ring, and my heart nearly stopped. The moment felt surreal. "Martha," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Will you marry me?" Her face lit up, and without a word, she threw her arms around me, her laugh echoing in the quiet of the afternoon. "Yes, James," she said, her voice full of joy. "Yes." I slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. In that moment, everything felt like it had fallen into place. I couldn't imagine anything more perfect than the woman beside me, the life we'd built together, and the future that was now in front of us. The proposal was the first of many milestones in our journey. We started planning the wedding right away. Martha had always dreamed of a wedding in a beautiful, historic church, and I knew she was set on having it at St. Joseph's Cathedral in the heart of Washington, D.C. It was a stunning building, the kind of place you'd imagine for a grand event. The old stone walls, the high vaulted ceilings, the intricate stained glass windows that cast a soft, colorful light over the entire space. It was a perfect choice for our day. We threw ourselves into the preparations. Martha handled most of the details, of course. She had a vision for everything. The flowers, the dresses, the invitations. She was meticulous, but it was clear how much love she poured into every decision. We decided to have the ceremony in the late afternoon, when the light would be just right, and then a reception at a nearby hotel. It was going to be a big celebration, with all of our family and friends there to share in the occasion. The day of the wedding arrived faster than I expected. It felt like the entire city was buzzing with excitement. I woke up early, pacing around my apartment, trying to calm my nerves. I kept telling myself it was just another day, but this was different. This was the day I would marry the woman I loved more than anything. I met up with my best man, Kevin, and the rest of the groomsmen at the church. We were all in tuxedos, running through last-minute details. I couldn't focus on anything other than the fact that, in a few hours, I would be standing at the altar, watching Martha walk down the aisle. I kept thinking about how beautiful she would look, how this moment would be the beginning of our forever. As the ceremony began, the music started playing, and the doors of the church opened. I caught my first glimpse of Martha, and my breath caught in my chest. She looked like an angel, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant updo, her face glowing with happiness, her dress simple but breathtaking. It was like the world had stopped spinning, and everything was perfect in that moment. I couldn't take my eyes off her as she walked toward me. I don't remember much of what the pastor said. I was too focused on the woman in front of me. When it was time to exchange vows, I held her hands in mine and promised her everything I could give. I promised to be her partner in everything, to support her through whatever came our way, and to love her for the rest of our lives. And when we said "I do," the entire room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for that final confirmation that we were truly meant to be together. After the ceremony, we celebrated with our family and friends. The reception was everything we dreamed of. There was food, dancing, laughter, and so much love. It felt like the entire world was celebrating with us. I remember dancing with Martha, holding her close, feeling like nothing else mattered except the two of us. We were happy, truly happy. We had everything ahead of us, and the future felt limitless. As we left the reception later that night, our car was decorated with ribbons, and the streets of DC were quiet, as if the city itself was letting us have our moment. I looked at Martha, her face glowing in the light of the street lamps, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was the start of something beautiful. Our story had only just begun, and no matter what the future held, I knew we would face it together. We were perfect. At least, that's what I thought at the time. And for a while it felt like a fairy tale. It didn't happen all at once, but over the next few months, something started to change. At first, it was small things, subtle shifts that I didn't pay much attention to. I was busy with work, and so was Martha. Life, after all, was always moving fast. But then, slowly, I began to notice that she wasn't quite the same. Martha had always been this bright, engaging person, always full of life, always so present. But now, she seemed distant. It wasn't anything overt, at least not at first. She was still the woman I'd married, still sweet and kind, but there was something different in the way she carried herself, something I couldn't put my finger on. She started spending more time at the salon, picking up extra shifts, even though I knew she didn't need to. I would come home after a long day of work, and she'd be gone, either at work or out with friends I didn't recognize. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just trying to keep busy, or maybe she was simply enjoying some space, some time for herself. But as days turned into weeks, I began to wonder if it was something more. It was the little things that started to stand out. For example, she was more secretive with her phone. She used to leave it around all the time, on the kitchen counter, on the coffee table, and I would glance at it sometimes without thinking. I knew her passcode, not that I ever needed to use it. But then, one evening, I came home to find her phone face down on the counter, something she'd never done before. When I picked it up, she walked in right behind me, her voice tight. "Don't go through my phone," she said sharply, before quickly taking it from my hands. I stared at her, confused. I didn't mean to. I know, she cut me off, her voice softer now but still laced with something I couldn't place. "I just don't want you snooping around." I didn't say anything in response, though my mind was already racing. There was a tension in the air now, something I couldn't ignore. She had always been open, transparent. But now she was pulling away from me in ways I didn't understand. It didn't stop there. I noticed that she would disappear for hours at a time without explanation. I'd ask her where she'd been, and she would offer vague answers, like she'd been out with a new friend or just running errands. But something didn't add up. The way she would avoid eye contact or the way she hesitated before answering me, it felt like she was hiding something. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but it was hard not to. I wasn't the kind of person to let my mind run wild, but the more I thought about it, the more I started to feel like something was wrong. Maybe I was overthinking it, but a nagging feeling kept gnawing at me, something telling me that there was more going on than I knew. I spent the next few weeks watching her closely, trying to piece things together. I didn't want to believe that anything was off, but every day, the little things added up. Her late nights at the salon became more frequent, and when she was home, she was often on her phone, typing away quickly, her expression distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. One night, when she had gone to bed early, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at her phone across the room. It was charging, sitting on the coffee table just like it always had. Normally, I wouldn't have even thought about touching it, but that night something felt different. I had this strange urge to just pick it up, to see if I could find out what was really going on. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was a bad idea, that I shouldn't invade her privacy. But the curiosity kept eating at me. I couldn't help it. I got up, walked over to the table and picked up her phone. My heart was pounding in my chest as I unlocked it. I hadn't even thought about whether I was violating her trust, I just needed to know. The first thing I looked at was her messages. She had a lot of texts, some from friends, some from clients, and some I didn't recognize. There were one or two from a number saved simply as unknown. I scrolled through them trying to make sense of it, but then something caught my eye. There was a message from the unknown number, "I can't wait to see you again. I miss you." My stomach dropped. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I wasn't prepared for that. I scanned through more messages, each one more intimate than the last. They weren't just casual texts, they were personal, flirtatious. I felt like I was being punched in the gut with every word I read. "I dream about you every night. You looked so good tonight. I can't stop thinking about you. I wish I was there with you right now." The messages weren't from someone I recognized, but they were clearly from someone who had a close relationship with Martha. Someone who was more than just a friend. I stood there for a long moment, frozen. I didn't know what to think or what to feel. Betrayal, confusion, anger. All of it hit me at once, a flood of emotions that left me reeling. I quickly put the phone down, feeling like I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do now. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand the truth. But another part of me didn't know if I was ready to hear it. I knew something was going on. I could feel it in my gut, but seeing the proof, it was different. It was like a weight had been dropped on me, and I couldn't escape it. For the rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together everything that had happened in the last few months. I couldn't help but wonder if I had missed signs before, if I had been blind to the truth because I didn't want to see it. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted with everything, was hiding something from me. And I didn't know what to do next. All I could do was wait. Wait for her to come home, wait for her to give me the answers I needed. And deep down, I was terrified of what I would hear when the truth finally came out. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, after I found the texts, something inside me shifted. I knew I had to get answers. The uncertainty was eating at me, and the truth, whatever it was something I couldn't keep avoiding. I needed to know who Martha really was. And so, against every instinct I had, I decided to do something I never thought I'd have to do. I decided to look through her things. It was early one morning when I made the decision. I hadn't slept much the night before. My mind was a mess, and I couldn't sit still. Martha had left for work, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt eerily quiet. I don't know what pushed me to do it. Maybe it was the overwhelming feeling that something was terribly wrong. Maybe it was the fear that I wasn't seeing the full picture. Whatever it was, I found myself standing in the hallway, looking at the door to our bedroom. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Part of me told myself that I was just being paranoid, that maybe the texts weren't what I thought they were. But another part of me told me that there were secrets buried deep, things Martha hadn't told me, things that I needed to understand if I was going to make sense of what had been happening between us. I walked into the bedroom, my heart beating faster with every step. I went straight to her dresser, the top drawer where she kept her most personal things, jewelry, receipts, little trinkets she'd collected over the years. My hands shook as I opened it, half expecting to find nothing, but instead, I found something strange, a stack of papers tucked away at the bottom, hidden behind some old scarves. I picked them up, my mind racing as I leafed through the documents. The first few were just receipts, appointments, things I could easily explain away. But then I froze. There it was, something I didn't expect. A birth certificate. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It wasn't hers. Or rather, it didn't match the name I knew. The certificate was in the name of Elliot Winters. I blinked at it, unable to make sense of it. I flipped the page, hoping it was some mistake, but it was real, official, stamped, the kind of document you couldn't fake. The name Elliot Winters was there, and underneath it, the date of birth, everything that should have matched Martha's. But it didn't. A rush of confusion flooded my mind. Was this a mistake? Or had she been hiding something from me? The questions started piling up faster than I could answer them. Why would she keep this a secret? Why wouldn't she tell me about this part of her life? I continued going through the papers, my hands trembling now, my thoughts becoming a blur of uncertainty and shock. The next document was a medical record, dated a few years ago. It was an assessment report. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at, but when it hit me, I couldn't breathe. It was a psychological evaluation. The notes on the page were clinical, professional, but the diagnosis was clear: gender dysphoria. Martha had transitioned from male to female. She had been living as Elliot, but the name on this paper was no longer that of the person I'd married. It was Martha. I couldn't believe it. The ground felt like it had shifted beneath my feet. How had I never known? How had she kept something like this from me for so long? My mind was racing. There were more documents. Medical records confirming hormone treatments, procedures, even letters from doctors explaining the steps of her transition. I felt like I was in a daze, staring at words that meant nothing and everything all at once. Everything I thought I knew about her, the woman I'd fallen in love with, suddenly felt like a lie. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe it was just a part of her that she hadn't shared with me. I kept reading, trying to understand, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but the more I uncovered, the more I felt this growing sense of betrayal. Not because she was transgender. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that she hadn't told me, that she hadn't trusted me with this part of her life, this part of her identity. We were married, for God's sake. How could she keep something so important from me? My hands were shaking as I dropped the papers back into the drawer, slamming it shut. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out of the house, to think, but I couldn't move. I stood there in the middle of the room, staring at nothing, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away from the truth I had just uncovered. But I couldn't. I had to face it. When Martha came home that evening, I didn't know what to say. I had spent the entire afternoon replaying every moment we'd shared, every conversation we'd had, every little detail I had missed. Could I have known? Should I have known? How could I have been so blind? She walked in, smiling as she always did, as if nothing had changed. But I couldn't smile back. My heart was pounding, my mind a whirlpool of confusion and anger. She looked at me, frowning when she saw my expression. "James, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tentative. I stood there, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All I could think about were the papers, the birth certificate, the medical records, everything I had found. And then, I heard myself speak, my voice tight with emotion. "Martha, why didn't you tell me?" Her face went pale, and I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Tell you what?" she asked, her voice feigning confusion, but I could tell she knew. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I replied, my voice rising. You weren't always Martha. You were Elliot. She froze, her eyes widening slightly. I could see the panic in her face, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. James, she began, but I cut her off. Why didn't you tell me? I asked again, my voice shaking now with a mix of hurt and disbelief. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me who you really are? She didn't answer. She just stood there, looking at me, and in that silence, I realized that everything between us, everything I thought we had just cracked wide open. And I didn't know if we could ever put it back together. I don't even know where to start. I thought I knew her, everything about her. How could I not? We'd built a life together, a marriage. I trusted her, loved her, and yet, all this time, I had been living a lie. The documents, the birth certificate, the medical records, it all shattered the world I thought I knew. Elliot. That name haunted me, replaying in my head, and all I could think was how stupid I had been not to see it. She wasn't who I thought she was. She wasn't Martha. The betrayal was suffocating. It was one thing to feel like she was keeping secrets from me, but this was something else entirely. I had shared my life with her, and all along, she had been hiding who she really was. Not only that, but I discovered the other side of her, Elliot, and the texts, the affair, the lies. It was like I was drowning in it all, and the worst part was, I didn't even know how to react. My mind was racing in circles, trying to make sense of everything. But no matter how many times I tried to calm myself down, I just couldn't. I was angry, furious even. I spent hours pacing around the house, the documents clutched in my hands, unable to stop replaying the conversations we'd had. How could I have been so blind? I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, fists clenched, thinking about what I was going to do when she came home. I needed answers. I needed her to face me, to face the truth. When Martha finally came through the door, I was waiting for her. She smiled at first, just like always, but when she saw the look on my face, the smile faltered. There was no warmth in me now, no affection. Just raw, boiling anger. You need to explain yourself, I said, voice low but steady. I didn't want to scream at her, but I could feel the rage building in my chest, and I didn't know how long I could hold it back. Her eyes went wide as she saw the papers in my hand. I didn't give her a chance to speak before I threw them down on the table in front of her. What the hell is this? I demanded. Who is Elliot? She took a step back, her face paling, and I saw the panic in her eyes before she quickly tried to cover it up. James, please, No, I shouted, cutting her off. Don't you dare. Don't you dare try to explain this. You've been lying to me this entire time. You have been cheating on me with some other guy. You were Elliot, and you never told me. What kind of person does that? She reached out, her hands shaking, and I could see how desperately she was trying to keep her composure, but I didn't care. I wasn't looking for an apology, and I sure as hell wasn't looking for her to make excuses. I was done listening to whatever reason she had for keeping me in the dark. I didn't want you to leave me, James, she said, her voice cracking. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd stop loving me. I thought I'd lose everything. Her words were like daggers, and they hit harder than anything else. She was more concerned about herself, about her own fear of rejection, than she was about me, about the man she had been deceiving. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You thought I'd leave you? Is that what you think? I spat, barely able to control my voice. I would have stood by you. I love you, Martha. Or at least I thought I did. But now? I don't even know who you are anymore. I was shaking now, trembling with so much rage that my hands were balled into fists. But she wasn't done. She tried to come closer, her hands reaching out like she could calm me down, but I wasn't having it. I stepped back, my body rigid with fury. You lied to me, I said, voice low and dangerous. You lied to me. And not just about who you are, but about everything. About who you were with. About the affair you were having behind my back. How dare you think you could get away with all of this? Her face went pale as my words hit their mark. She was trembling now, her eyes welling with tears, but none of that mattered to me. I felt humiliated. I felt like I was drowning in betrayal. And in that moment I just snapped. My hand shot out, grabbing the closest thing to me, a hammer I had left on the counter from a recent project. I don't even remember how it happened. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't rational. All I knew was that the anger inside me, this deep, sickening rage, had to go somewhere. Before I could even stop myself, I raised the hammer and swung it at her. It was a blur after that. The sound of the hammer connecting with her flesh. Her screams. Her cries for me to stop. But I couldn't stop. It felt like everything that had been building inside me, the lies, the cheating, the deceit, had exploded, and it was all directed at her. She tried to push me away, to defend herself, but I wasn't hearing her. I couldn't hear anything but the pounding of my own heart in my ears, the roar of my anger filling my head. I kept hitting her, over and over, each strike fueled by the betrayal I felt. When I finally stopped, she was lying on the floor, gasping for breath, her body trembling. I stood there, panting, covered in sweat. It wasn't enough. The rage, the humiliation, none of it was enough to make me feel better. I felt empty, hollow. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved, at the woman I had thought I knew, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just walk away from this, but I couldn't stand to look at her anymore either. I dragged her into the bathroom, her limp body making it difficult, but I didn't care. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I just knew I couldn't stay in that room with her. I shoved her into the corner of the bathroom, leaving her there, alone, hurting. I couldn't face her anymore. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I walked out of the bathroom, grabbed my coat and left. I didn't look back. Not once. I didn't even try to run. I just sat there staring at her, my wife, covered in blood, her body still. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I couldn't move, couldn't think. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. I had never felt more lost in my life, more distant from the man I used to be. It felt like everything was crumbling in front of me, but I couldn't stop it. I didn't even know how to process what I had just done. The hammer was still in my hand, though I didn't even realize it until I heard the sirens outside. My heart pounded in my chest, and I finally stood, my body numb. I walked to the phone, hands shaking, and I called 911. My voice barely worked. All I could say was, "I need help. I did something terrible." I wasn't sure what I expected, but the operator stayed on the line with me, asking questions I couldn't answer. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want this life anymore. But there was no way out now. When the police arrived, I didn't move. I just let them arrest me. There was no fight in me, no attempt to deny what I'd done. I didn't even look at them as they handcuffed me. The shame, the guilt, the horror, it was suffocating. The flashes of what I'd done kept playing over and over in my head, like a bad movie I couldn't shut off. The image of Martha's face, the blood everywhere, it wouldn't leave. They took me to the station, and everything felt like a blur. I could barely remember what happened next. They asked me questions, but I couldn't answer them, not truthfully, not without losing whatever little control I had left. I sat in that cold, sterile room for what felt like hours, waiting for the inevitable. And when the news broke, I could feel it, how everything changed. I could feel the eyes on me, the judgment, even though I wasn't outside yet. I wasn't ready for what the world would say about me. The world would never understand. They wouldn't see the truth, the pressure, the pain. They would only see what I had done. When the trial started, I was already in the deepest pit I could imagine. My lawyers argued that I wasn't in my right mind when it happened, that I was emotionally distraught, shattered by the revelation of Martha's secret. They tried to paint me as a man who couldn't cope with the truth about his wife, someone pushed beyond the edge by a devastating lie. But I knew deep down it wasn't that simple. The rage, the violence, it had come from somewhere darker. It wasn't just about the secret. It was about everything. The years of deception, the betrayal, the anger I couldn't control. The prosecutors, on the other hand, painted a much darker picture of me. They spoke of cruelty and madness, of a man who had snapped, who had lost all sense of reason in the heat of the moment. They painted me as a monster. And maybe in that moment, I was. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. I wasn't surprised when they found me guilty of first-degree murder. I remember hearing the sentence, "life in prison," and I felt nothing. I had no tears left to cry. It was as if the life had been drained out of me already. The case went viral, and the tragedy rippled across the country. It was more than just a murder. It became a symbol, a focal point for discussions about transgender rights, about society's treatment of people like Martha. Feminist and LGBTQ+ organizations picked it up, using it as a way to call for greater understanding, greater protection for transgender people. They talked about how hard it was to come out, how hard it was to live in a world that didn't always accept you. They spoke about the fear and isolation Martha must have felt, keeping her truth hidden, afraid of losing the love she had in her marriage. But it wasn't just about that. It was about how fragile everything was, the trust, the love. And how easily it could all fall apart when the truth was buried too long. People in Washington couldn't stop talking about it. Neighbors who had known us both for years were in shock. They couldn't understand how I had gone from the friendly guy they knew to the man who had committed such a brutal act. Some of them couldn't even look at me. They whispered behind their hands, unsure whether they should feel sympathy or disgust. Martha's family was devastated, of course. They hadn't been able to reach her for days after the incident, and when they finally did, it was too late. They were angry at me, but there was something more in their eyes, something I couldn't place. I had destroyed a family, torn apart a life, and now there was no undoing it. I couldn't blame them for how they felt. I couldn't blame anyone, not even myself. I wasn't the man I used to be, not anymore. I didn't know who I was. My own family, though, they struggled with it the most. They couldn't accept what I'd done. They couldn't reconcile the James they knew with the man I had become. They tried to understand, but they couldn't. They tried to justify my actions, saying that the pressure, the emotional toll of learning the truth, had pushed me too far. But even they knew deep down that there was no excuse for what I'd done. No matter how much they wanted to forgive me, they couldn't. The guilt, the shame, it was suffocating. I couldn't escape it. And as I sat in my prison cell, I realized that the punishment wasn't just what the court had given me. The real punishment was the way I'd ruined everything. My life, Martha's life, the future we could have had. And for what? For a secret, for a betrayal that wasn't even mine to hold. I didn't know what I expected from all of this. But I was left with nothing. And there was no way to fix it now. There was no way to bring her back, no way to undo the damage. And as I sat there, in the silence of my cell, I wondered how I could ever live with what I had done. How could I ever face myself again?